Hello and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today I'll be showing you how to cycle from Kensington in West London to Richmond Park in South West London. This ride takes under half an hour and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey takes the best part of an hour, so cycling is the obvious way to make this journey. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute as well, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting outside Kensington Olympia railway station and we're going to head west down Hammersmith Road. Hammersmith Road has some cycling infrastructure on it, mostly these one protected cycle lanes. They are a little bit rudimentary, they tend to give up at bus stops and they're not continuous through junctions, but they do tend to do the job. There are also a few sections on this road in both directions where the cycle lane gives up and it drops you in a bus lane. That's not ideal and bus lanes aren't proper cycle infrastructure, but in my experience going down this road, those sections are not too bad as they are relatively short and they do dovetail with the cycle lanes quite nicely, so I don't think it should be too much of a problem. In the long term, TfL actually has ambitions to put a proper two-way protected cycleway down this street of a similar quality to the one that goes through Hammersmith, Chiswick and also is on its way to Brentford and Hounslow at the moment, currently under construction. Unfortunately, I wouldn't expect that to happen for at least another couple of years, so for now you'll have to be comfortable riding in a bus lane like this for a short stretch. This isn't the busiest bus corridor in London by any means, so as you can see, at certain points you will have the bus lane mostly to yourself. Now we'll be joining a proper protected lane in a moment. Turn up left onto this drop curb and cycle on the shared space here and make your way to the Toucan crossing, which is a crossing that both pedestrians and cycles can use. There's then another cycle crossing here and make sure you push the button so it knows you're there and it'll put you onto this lovely protected two-way cycle track. This track weaves its way really nicely through the Hammersmith Gyratory, which used to be a horrible place to cycle but is now an absolute breeze. Despite the fact that there are quite a few traffic lights on here, I've actually found the timings of them to be pretty decent and I almost always get through this in really good time. It then drops you onto King Street, which is the aforementioned Cycleway 9 which I was talking about. This is a high quality two-way cycle track that extends all the way to Turnham Green. On this section, one thing you've got to watch out for though is pedestrians walking into the track without looking, including that guy with a wheelbarrow full of rocks, which is a first for me. But really every time I come down here there is somebody walking into the road without necessarily looking where they're going, so do make sure you're careful as you go down there. You then want to turn off and head down Bridge Avenue, which is going to take us towards Hammersmith Bridge. For those that don't know, Hammersmith Bridge has been closed to all traffic except for people walking for a good few years now, and it shows no sign of fully reopening anytime soon. However, it has been temporarily at least reopened to people cycling, and it really opens up loads of new routes here for us to do, including this one, which is going to take us from Kensington to Richmond Park. Now, the current plan is for this bridge to be open until roughly mid-May, but there was some uncertainty as to whether or not it would stay open to cycles in the long term. I actually have a bit of an answer for that as I put in a Freedom of Information request to Hammersmith and Fulham Council, which is in charge of looking after the bridge. What they said was that they expect the bridge to shut again to people cycling from mid-May and then more stabilisation works to take place. But as soon as that phase 1 of stabilisation works is done, they will restore cycling on the bridge, basically reverting to the situation that we have now. Now, they do also say that they intend to fully reopen the bridge to all traffic in the long term, a sort of a phase 2 stabilisation, but nobody thinks that that's realistically going to happen anytime soon because the funding is just not there. So in summary, it'll be open until mid-May, then it'll close again probably for a few more months, and then it should open again to people cycling on the carriageway as well. It is also worth saying that even when the bridge is, in inverted commas, closed to cycling, you can still push your bike on the pedestrian walkways, so you can still do these routes that feature the bridge. The worst that would happen is that you'll have to dismount and walk your bike along the side, so it would add a few minutes and not be as fun, but it's still there as an option. Of course, closing the bridge hasn't just affected the bridge, it's also affected streets around the bridge, most notably this one that we're on here, Castle Now. In this direction we have a slightly ropey and intermittent cycle lane that's protected by these wands, and in the other direction we have a bus lane. Now normally I wouldn't really like this as cycle infrastructure, it's a little bit weak, but the closure of the bridge has also meant that there's effectively no through traffic on this street at all because it has nowhere for it to go as we're on a peninsula. So the riding conditions along here are really comfortable and I think most people would be happy along here. We want to turn off right in a second down a street called Hammersmith Road. Make sure you look to your right and over your shoulder as you make that right turn, or you can just pause in the cycle lane, wait for a gap in the traffic if there is any, and then head into Hammersmith Road. Like Castle Now, the side streets in the Barnes Peninsula are also really quiet thanks to the closure of the bridge. There really isn't any through traffic on them at all. So we are going to use them to pick our way south towards Church Street, which is one of the main high streets in Barnes, and then over Barnes Green, which fortunately has a cycle path on it that you'll see in a moment. If you need a bit of help with the wayfinding on this part of the video or really any other part of it and remembering which way to turn, then you can always download the free digital map of the route, which is linked in the description below the video. It's in a GPX format and that should work on whatever app or device that you like to use. It is a standard format and you can load that in and it should point you in the right direction. Although to be honest, after watching this video, you'll probably have it in your head anyway, so you may not need it. We now need to cross Church Road to get onto the common, and I use this little protective island here, which allows you to cross one lane at a time. It would be better to have a cycle crossing over that street though. There is a zebra crossing there which could be converted into a parallel crossing which you're also allowed to cycle over. Normally there would be a dropped curb leading from Barnes Green there onto the crescent which we're on now, but unfortunately someone had parked an SUV on it, so we did have to push past that. You are allowed to cycle on the paths on Barnes Green, but I find it a little bit more comfortable to go on the crescent as there are a lot of people walking on it and also walking dogs with leads, which can make it a little bit tricky to get past. But if you do look at the signposts as you go past, there are signs showing that it is a shared walking and cycling route. If you look at that lamppost, you'll see a little blue sign pointing us down this alleyway. Make sure you go dead slow down here. It is a cycle route, but it's also a blind corner and very narrow, so if there's someone walking down there, you don't want to cycle right into them. This is actually an old designated cycle route, although it's not very well signposted. And one improvement that could be made would, I think, be to put a little path over on the left there, over that little bit of grass. I don't know if you noticed it, but there's actually a little muddy track going over there because a lot of people walk and cycle over it anyway to cut the corner and to avoid that little mini roundabout that we went on. It would surely make sense to formalise that, I think. Now, we are currently on Vine Road, which is a reasonably quiet street with some quite unorthodox traffic calming. There's actually two different level crossings on here, which I think makes it enough of a pain to drive down that most people don't bother or try to do so, especially given that there is another parallel route. As a result, it's reasonably quiet, although it does have a disadvantage, which means that when these crossings are closed, the few cars that do try and get down here tend to get bunched up at the crossing waiting with you. So while you may end up with not too many cars on the street, they may unfortunately be quite near where you are because you'll get bunched up. It is worth saying that the surfacing of this road does leave a lot to be desired, and there are quite a lot of potholes, especially around the speed bumps, which could also probably do with being relayed to be a bit more cycle friendly. Now, we're going to use this toucan crossing here. We're not going to be cycling on the carriageway on Priory Lane. We're actually going to use the crossing to join this pavement cycle track. Now, the pavement cycle track on Priory Lane is pretty controversial, and let me start by saying that it is not very good at all. The first thing that you'll probably notice cycling on it is that the vast majority of people who cycle down Priory Lane, which is one of the ways to get to Richmond Park, a very popular cycling spot for leisure cycling, the vast majority of people do not cycle on the cycle lane. They mostly use the carriageway. Now, there is a good argument for this. Not only is the cycle lane incredibly narrow and poorly surfaced, it is also arguably a bit dangerous if used improperly, in the fact that at best it gives way at most side roads, and at worst it has quite ambiguous priority when approaching side roads and driveways. Given it's also a two-way cycle track, this is a bit of a recipe for drivers pulling into or out of side roads and not looking in the right place and accidentally hitting someone on a bike, which is bad. I personally still prefer it to riding on the carriageway, but it is worth keeping a real eye out when you do, being incredibly cautious and just being aware that there is a bit of a risk there still. Improving the cycle lane is a bit tricky because there isn't really very much space and the pavement is very squeezed and far too narrow as it is as well. I think, having surveyed the options, the best option is probably to make Priory Lane a one-way street for general traffic along with Clarence Lane, so turning it into a little mini gyratory for general traffic. That would let you use one of the general traffic lanes to widen and build a better cycle lane, and also to widen the pavement as well, because pedestrians do need a lot more space on the approach to the park there. It's currently a little bit of a joke. I think that street is controlled by Wandsworth Council, so if anyone from Wandsworth's watching, do have a think about that one, because I think it's a pretty urgent safety improvement given how many people cycle to Richmond Park every week. And talking of Richmond Park, we've made it here. And if this footage of people cycling on more or less traffic-free streets doesn't make you want to visit the park and its beautiful scenery, then I don't know what will. Reviewing that route, you can see that it is incredibly direct, and it's incredible that it took me 26 minutes to cycle that when it's pretty out of the way by other modes of transport. I wanted to get this video out this week because I thought that this was a really good example of the kind of longer distance route that opening Hammersmith Bridge up to cycling really enables. I did a shorter route a couple of weeks ago just showing Barnes to Hammersmith, but there were loads like this and I'll be doing more on the channel, so do make sure that you hit subscribe so that you don't miss any. Thank you so much again to everyone on the Patreon. If anyone is feeling generous and would like to chuck us a couple of quid, then you can find a link in the description to it below the video. And if you want other people to find this video, you think it's useful, just make sure you hit that like button and leave me a comment below letting me know what you think, as it does boost the video in the YouTube algorithm as well. I will hopefully see you guys again in the next video. Thank you so much for watching and goodbye.